Hello, and thank you for joining me today for another thought from the Bible. I'm a person who really loves storms. I love thunder and lightning and extreme weather like that. And I live in a pretty good country for enjoying those things here in Liberia as we transition from the rainy season into the dry season. We encounter some great big storms, and this last week, overnight there was an enormous storm. But the problem is I didn't really get to experience all that much of it. I woke up at one point about 2 in the morning and heard this almighty clap of thunder, and I could hear the rain thundering against the roof, and I rolled over and went straight back to sleep and didn't hear anything else until the alarm went off at 6 in the morning. It was only when I spoke to my husband Dave after we woke up with the alarm that he talked about how long that storm had gone on for. I'd missed it. Well, I got up and checked our little weather station that we have here, and it had recorded more than 100 lightning strikes since midnight. And I had heard one clap of thunder. Now, I felt very well rested, which was lovely, but a little bit sad to have missed it all. But that's sort of the opposite of how I feel about those storms that life throws at us. I would love to feel peaceful enough to sleep through those, but instead it's in those moments that I tend to be kept awake at night. I think we've all been there, right? Trying to sleep but worrying about a situation or replaying something in our heads or just thinking about what's coming up soon. Storms in life are things that we all have to face, whether they're quite small or massive, great big things. We face them, and sometimes they sneak upon us, sudden calamities that we just weren't expecting, that can change our lives in an instant. In Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41, we read, "That day when evening came, he," that's Jesus, "said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" I love this story. There's so much that we can get out of it. Jesus, this man who was fully man, fully human, but also fully God, he was exhausted. He was at the end of his human strength. If you read back in the chapter before this, you'll find that he had just been teaching a huge crowd. He'd been performing miracles, healing people, driving out spirits, and now he was utterly exhausted. And I imagine at the start of that little boat trip, it was quite nice. You know, he curled up in the stern, put his head on a cushion, and fell asleep. Gentle waves lapping the edge of the boat. I think it would have been quite relaxing. But then the waves start to get bigger and the wind gets more ferocious, and there is water entering the boat. It's splashing over them all, including Jesus. And suddenly somehow even he is still asleep. How exhausted must he have been in a purely natural sense to sleep through that mess, that chaos, that storm? The disciples, though, they saw this storm building up and they genuinely thought that they were going to drown. Some of these men were seasoned fishermen who had spent most of their lives on this very body of water, and yet they were absolutely terrified and convinced that this sudden storm they were facing was the end. I think when those sudden storms come up in our lives, we can feel a little bit like that. A relationship ends, or we lose a job, or the economy crashes around us and we wonder how we're going to afford to pay the bills through the winter, or somebody dies, or we're in an accident, or we're sick. Life goes from peaceful sailing to suddenly battling against something that we simply cannot face on our own. But what a beautiful picture of hope this story gives us. See, firstly, it tells us that we are not alone. Jesus is with us, offering us that same peace and calm that he showed here in the midst of that storm. In those moments where we can't sleep, where we are struggling with what we're facing, we can turn to Jesus and say, "Teacher, Lord, I feel like I'm drowning here. I don't see any way out of this situation, but I know that you are with me. And if you could sleep through that storm, then I can sleep through this one." Secondly, it's in those stormy moments that our faith is sharpened. We wouldn't need to trust in Jesus all that much if life was constantly smooth sailing all of the time. Sometimes it's only in those moments where life seems unstable and the ground beneath our feet seems a bit unsteady that we learn to lean more fully on our Saviour, to trust that the waves aren't going to overwhelm us, that even if it doesn't look like it right now, God is still 100% in control. And finally, this story shows us that there is absolutely nothing that Jesus can't do. With 3 words, he calmed that storm. The wind died down in an instant. It was over. The wind and the waves obey the God that we serve. Isn't that exciting? There is nothing outside of his control, absolutely nothing. There is no power that is beyond him. There is no situation that can ever defeat him. Yes, he was fully man, exhausted in that boat, but he was simultaneously fully God with power to control the storm. He understands what we're going through, but simultaneously he has unimaginable power to overcome any situation, and that is a reassuring thought for us when we face a storm. So if you find yourself in that position right now, if life has thrown something at you that has changed everything and you're not sure how you're going to cope and you feel a little bit like you're drowning, then I want to encourage you, because it's true, you may be battered for a little while. It may hurt for a little while, but Jesus is still there in the boat. He has not left you. You are not alone. You can trust in God and you will see your faith reawakened in these moments. And always we can remember that the Bible tells us that we personally can know his incomparably great power, the power that is the same as the mighty strength that God exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms, far above all rule and authority, power and dominion. That power, that incomparably great power, is in the boat with us, no matter how rough the seas may seem. It's in those stormy moments where we have the chance to witness that awesome power at work. Thank you so much for joining me today for that thought from the Bible. I'll be back on Wednesday next week with another video. See you then.